ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय जन्माद्यस्य यतोऽन्वयादितरतश्च अर्थेषु अभिज्ञस्वराट् तेने ब्रह्महृदाय आदिकवये मुह्यन्ति यत्सूरयः तेजो वारिमृदां यथा विनिमयो यत्र त्रिसर्गो मृषा धाम्ना स्वेन सदा निरस्तकुहकं सत्यं परं धीमहि निगमकल्पतरोर्गलितं फलं शुकमुखादमृतद्रवसंयुतं पिबत भागवतं रसमालयं मुहुरहो रसिका भुवि भावुकाः. So we enter the second chapter of the seventh Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we saw in the last chapter the dialogue between Yudhishthira and Narada begin when Yudhishthira asks a question about the wondrous event of Sishupala being absorbed in Krishna. So we see, by the way, in Bhagavatam that there are various glimpses given into the wonderful pastimes of Krishna, which will all be unfolded in great detail in the 10th Skandha. We only get some teasers here and there, which are themselves so wonderful to even listen to and be mentioned. So we saw that in the court of Yudhishthira, this king Sishupala hurled abuses at Krishna non-stop, and he was eventually slayed by Krishna. And the wonder of all is, after he was slayed, the light of his soul physically was seen as merging into the very transcendental body of Krishna. And also we saw mentioned by Narada that there are many ways in which people have attained Krishna: through conjugal love by the gopis, through fear by Kamsa, who is his uncle, through hate by Sishupala, through friendship by the Vrishnis, by Uddhava, Arjuna, and so on, and by devotion by Narada himself, he says. So here again we see the mention of the gopis, mention of Kamsa, and mention of the Vrishnis, the friends of Krishna. So all of these are again just glimpses. Kamsa's story and how he was so afraid of Krishna, morbid fear which consumed him until he was slayed by Krishna, and thereby he also attained Krishna, is again given in great detail in the 10th Skandha. So, but the story of Sishupala is what triggered this dialogue, because Yudhishthira asked Narada, what is the reason for this? And Narada explained first of all that Krishna being transcendental, his appearance is not due to any desire as others who take on body. Jivas take on body because of desire, but Krishna descends out of grace, and therefore anyone who fixes his mind completely on Krishna, the transcendental being of Krishna as Bhagavan, as Avatar, in whichever emotion, if it is completely undisturbed, exclusive, then that results in attaining Krishna. So then he says the example of this is seen with great demons such as Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, and so on. So specifically Yudhishthira asked, tell me about Hiranyakashipu, because his son Prahalad is very famous as the great devotee. So we very much want to know how did so much devotion come in Prahalad and the glorious story of Prahalad. So that's how Narada begins now. Narada says this starts with the time when Hiranyaksha was killed. So we go back in time way before even the events of the previous Skandhas, because in the last Skandha we already saw Diti, having lost both her sons Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, wanted to kill Indra, and she brought forth the Maruts and all the rest. So well before that, when Hiranyakashipu was still alive and Hiranyaksha had just been slayed, is where Narada picks up the story. So Hiranyaksha, as we saw in the 3rd Skandha, was killed by Varaha Avatar, the divine boar avatar. And after that happened, everybody was filled with anger in the family of Hiranyakashipu. So Narada says when Hiranyaksha was slain, Hiranyakashipu was filled with anger and rage and grief, everything, because he had lost his dear brother who was so loyal to him. They were both evil, and they were so united in their activities of evil. And therefore, when Hiranyakashipu lost his brother, his evil brother, he was burning with anger, and with rage and anger, he was looking with red eyes, and he was so terrible to look at. It is said his teeth were looking fearful, his glances were fierce, and he raised his trident and he unleashed terror now, because he was so angry at the Devas and at Bhagavan Hari for the death of his brother. So he addresses all the demons and he says, "Oh, demons," he addresses all their names. And he said, "My beloved younger brother has been killed by Hari because of the petty enemies who are the demigods. And therefore, I am going to get rid of all of them." He says, it is very, he says, it's very unfair that Hari, who is meant to be impartial, took the side of the Devas and killed my brother Hiranyaksha. So we already saw this explained by Shukra Brahma Rishi, that Bhagavan is impartial, he has the same vision towards all, but it is just that during the cycle of time, depending on the cycle of time, different forces are seeming to be having sustenance. During dark times, evil forces have sustenance, and during bright times, the same evil forces are vanquished. So the same Hiranyakashipu did not question when he and his brother were unleashing terror. That was also happening because of the power he was given, his brother was given by the Supreme Being. He was abusing that power, of course, but he at that time did not question that the Lord was supporting him. But now that the Lord at that point decided to end the atrocities of Hiranyaksha and kill him, he is now questioning as if he is very wise, let's say. So he's saying he is supposed to be impartial, and why is he now taking the side of the demigods and taking the form of this wild animal as a boar and using a deceptive trick, killing my brother? I shall teach them a lesson. He says, I am going to go after the very source, because the very source of all this is Vishnu, the supreme being Hari. So I am going to get rid of him. So he thinks out of his arrogance, Hiranyakashipu, that he can deny God. So this is the very quality of the one who is so consumed with atheism that they say they can deny God and they can prove him wrong. There are such qualities found even today, and that is exactly what Hiranyakashipu represents. In fact, the word Hiranyakashipu, interestingly, has a symbolism too. Hiranya means gold and Kashipu means bed. So, gold and bed, which corresponds to lust and greed, are the two qualities that are demoniacal. So, his very name embodies lust and greed, being of the literal meaning of bed and gold, and therefore, consumed with lust and greed, he wants to lord over matter and does not have any sense of the recognition of the source of all this. He denies this, so he says, I shall kill the one who slayed my brother Hari, and when I kill him, all the demigods will wither away, because they are all like branches that are supported by the root, and the root is Hari, Vishnu, and therefore I shall kill him, he foolishly declares. And then after that, he unleashes terror. He says to all the demons there, he says, go to various parts of earth, and wherever there are sages and Brahmanical people doing austerities, engaging in sacrificial performances, studying the scriptures, observing sacred vows, practicing charity, destroy them, he says. So, this quality again has been seen again and again by atheistic demoniacal rulers who unleash terror on pious and religious people. Hiranyakashipu is one of the original ones in this. He says, resort to parts of earth where there is any pious activity being performed and exterminate them. He says, Sad Sudayadvam Tapo Yajna Swadhyaya Vrata Daninah. And then he says, Vishnur Dvijakriya Mulo Yajno Dharmamayaf Puman Devarishi Pitru Bhutanam Dharmasya Cha Parayanam. That is, he says, Vishnu, the Supreme Lord, depends on his very existence on all these rituals. It is the glorification through rituals, through sacrifice, yajnas, through righteousness, through charity, that he is even sustained. So he thinks that the Lord depends on all these activities, whereas the reality is the other way around. The Lord is the root of all these activities. The Supreme Being is the very principle that is at the root of all religious activities, and yet he thinks it's religious activities that's sustaining God, and therefore let's destroy all religious activities. Let's go and wherever there are the Brahmanical people, wherever there are cows, wherever Vedas are followed, he says, set fire to them and then cut all the trees there too. So he is just the very embodiment of terror, Hiranyakashipu. So we first, before we go to the auspicious, glorious personality of Prahalada, we first see the terror embodiment of Hiranyakashipu. He is filled with rage and he turns his rage towards all pious people. He says, let's kill everyone. Let's kill those who are engaged in charity, engaged in sacrifices, engaged in studying the scriptures, engaged in doing any kind of sacred vows, and let's cut all the trees, let's set fire. And by this way, he sets forth the demoniacal forces, and they go forth and they burn down towns, villages, cowpens, gardens, fields, parks, hermitages, farmers' fields, mountains, villages at the base of mountains, even cities. They demolish bridges, they break walls, they demolish city gates, they cut down fruit bearing trees, they burn down dwellings of people who are engaged in any religious activity. So he is just literally through his forces unleashing terror in the various parts of earth where all of these activities are being performed, and he doesn't spare anyone. So with this kind of terror, after unleashing it in his court, he goes inside his inner quarters, and there he finds his younger brother's wife and his own mother Diti, and all of the family are still grieving. So now this fellow turns a new face and starts speaking great words of wisdom. So this is the quality of a demoniacal person preaching. There are many who can just speak words of wisdom, but their activities are completely opposite, and that's exactly what Hiranyakashipu again represents. After unleashing terror from his court by ordering all the demons to do this kind of uh, reign of terror being unleashed, he goes inside and before his family and before people who are grieving, now he starts speaking words of wisdom because they are still grieving. He says, "O mother, O sister in law, O sons, why are you lamenting? Because nobody is permanent. You have to first of all be happy that our dear brother died in battle, because dying in battle with bravery is praiseworthy. And you also have to realize that people come and go together just as wayfarers get together in a shed." So he gives this example. All these examples are very beautiful, except that it's coming from Hiranyakashipu. He says, when there is in the roads, there are places where the good-hearted people, sometimes in hot summer days, they establish tents with water pots so that anybody who is tired can take rest in the shade of the tent and drink some water, sit for some time, and then continue with their travel. This used to be a practice, and we have seen this also even recently in Bharat, many places. So this was what was used by Hiranyakashipu. He says, when different travelers are on the road, they get under the tent at any time they are tired, and when they are under the tent, they meet a few people, they start chatting, they chat for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then after that they all go in their separate directions. He says it's no different from that, how people get together in this world. Instead of 15, 20 minutes, it's 15, 20 years. But after that, they each goes in their own way. So the time may be a little longer, but the principle is the same. People get together for some time, They seem to be friendly for some time and then they go in different directions. Whereas the soul is eternal, free from decay, taintless, omnipresent, all knowing, transcendent. He says, Nitya Atma Avyaya Shuddha Sarvaga Sarvavit Paraha. So he is thereby preaching perfect words of wisdom. And that's the irony here that Hiranyakashipu, this terrible demon who we just saw unleash terror, Narada says, right after unleashing terror, he goes inside and he is speaking all these words. So, this is why it is said, talk is cheap. Anyone can speak words of wisdom. How one acts is where the rubber meets the road. But in any case, these words are very wise, and he is speaking these words to console his mother and his sister in law and all these family members. So he says, you ought not to grieve because the body is impermanent, it comes together and it goes. And he went in a very honorable way by dying in a battlefield. The soul is eternal, the soul is without any action, just as trees that are near a moving stream seem to move because this water moves in the stream and the reflection of the tree seems to be moving, though the tree is fixed. He says, similarly, the soul, which is fixed, seems to be moving, seems to be acting in association with elements of nature, and therefore to identify the body with the soul is the core delusion. And by doing so, the soul goes from body to body. So he says the jiva goes from one body to another due to desire, due to its own vasanas, and thereby it is taking on these bodies, identifying with these bodies, and thereby it is going about in delusion. But in reality, the soul, the spirit, is without any action. It is simply the ever present principle of consciousness. And then he also narrates a story, an old story, which is to drive home this point. He says, once there was a king called Suyagnya who was killed in the battle, just as his brother was, and his queens were crying, and they would not even permit the body to leave. They were holding on to him and saying, where will you go? And time was going away, and the king had to be taken away for the cremation, but the queens were not letting it, apparently. And therefore, it is said that Yama himself, the god of death, we saw Yama come earlier in the story of Ajamila. Yama is a self realized being. So, Yama comes in the form of a little child and he gives instructions to these queens and he says, you are holding on to this body, but this body is temporary. Look at me, I am a small boy. So he comes in the form of a small boy. He says, I was abandoned by my parents, and yet I am protected by the Lord. The Lord protects the small fetus in the womb and looks after the baby when it comes out. And it is the same Lord, when the time is up, he dissolves the body, and the created being dissolves, and therefore what is imperishable never changes, but that which is created is destroyed. You have to recognize that that which is meant to be protected will be protected no matter where he is. Even if one is on the road and one is dropped on the road, or one is in the forest, nothing will happen if he is meant to be protected. But if one is meant to be destroyed, then even if he is very well guarded at home, he will be destroyed at the appointed hour, because everything happens according to destiny, which is fixed by karma. The body is born because of identification with desire, and the spirit, due to this false identification, takes itself to be the body. But in reality, the conscious principle, which is the spirit, which is the reason why the body is able to think and speak and hear and act and move and so on, that conscious principle is never seen even when the body is alive. The body only manifests actions, but the conscious principle is indwelling. And when that principle is not there anymore inside the body, then the body seems dead. But the activity of the body is simply a matter of karma. It's a product of destiny, and therefore one ought not to be bewildered by the activity or the lack thereof for the body, but see the conscious principle that is always there and that cannot go anywhere. So it has simply left the body, but it is never destroyed. He says there is once a hunter who killed a bird, and there was a pair of birds, and one bird was killed, and the other bird went near the bird that was killed and was lamenting, sitting, "Oh, you have been killed. Now, what can I do?" And while he was sitting there, the hunter now killed this bird as well. So he says, such is the situation of those who are lamenting for the others who have died. Because what he points out very interestingly is the hunter is time, and time kills everyone. And when one dies, there are those around him or her who lament, not recognizing that they are also going to be swallowed by the same time in a matter of just time again. And therefore, there is no point in lamenting over something that's inevitable. So it is the way of destiny. But the real principle, which is the consciousness, which is the pure spirit, that is not subject to creation or destruction, that is eternal. And therefore, recognizing this, you ought to let go. And by hearing this, it is said that the queens of Suyagnya let go, and Hiranyakashipu shares the story, and thereby he says, similarly, you also ought not to grieve for Hiranyaksha. He is my brother, he is very dear to me, and I have accepted him passing away. You also have to accept listening to him. Diti, the mother, and the sister-in-law, that is the wife of Hiranyaksha, and the sons were all pacified as well, and they became more calm. So with this chapter ends. Speaking words of wisdom is very different from living it, and that's what Hiranyakashipu demonstrates, and that's what Bhagavatam shows us with this chapter. While every word Hiranyakashipu spoke is very beautiful, it can be quoted as a discourse where he speaks about the impermanence of the body and the eternality of the soul and the illusion of the soul identifying with the body and thereby going from body to body. All of that, he said, is entirely true, and yet it is not something that was operating in him. He was only speaking from his mouth, not from his heart. And therefore, that is extremely important to notice that one who speaks from the heart, even if his words are not perfect, is far more valuable than one who speaks from the mouth while his heart is filled with darkness. And therefore, it is always said that's why that example is better than precept. So, how one lives is more important than how one speaks. And that's what this chapter demonstrates us, while also giving us the highest wisdom through the words of Hiranyakashipu. And with this chapter ends. We will now see what Hiranyakashipu does. As we saw, while he speaks all these words of wisdom, his heart is filled with revenge and he wants to get back, and therefore he'll engage in activities to get his revenge. And what happens after that will be seen from next chapter onward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.